I can't count the number of times that I heard during the election season that women will be bleeding out in their cars because they'll no longer be able to receive care. And they were talking about women having miscarriages there. But this is it's just a lie that pro-abortionists are trying to push. There's not a single state in this country where a woman is going to be prosecuted for having an abortion.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview.
Welcome to Outstanding, the podcast where we examine issues in the news and how they affect our lives from a biblical worldview. I'm Casey Harper with The Washington Stand, and I'll be your host for today's episode. Planned Parenthood, they released their shocking new report and boasted a record high abortion figure. The group touted 402,200 abortions just last year. That's nearly a 25% increase in the last decade. Meanwhile, Planned Parenthood is receiving more federal taxpayer dollars than ever before, all while Republicans are in control of 3 branches of government. What's going on here? By the way, the abortion pill is more popular than ever. Even in states where abortion is illegal, you can simply get an abortion pill in the mail, something the Biden administration celebrated. This raises a lot of serious questions. Is law enforcement letting this happen? Why aren't they stopping it? And why aren't they going after the distributors? And are our hospitals and the media covering up abortions by calling them miscarriages? We'll talk about that later. Where do we go from here? Well, we have a lot to dive into, so stick around. On the podcast this week, to help enlighten us on these issues, and they are complex, we have Mary Szoch. She's the director of the Center for Human Dignity at Family Research Council. Mary researches, writes, and coordinates collaborative efforts with other pro-life advocates on policies around life and human dignity. This is great. While getting her degree at the University of Notre Dame, and she didn't think I'd bring this up probably, Mary played basketball for the Fighting Irish, and she lettered on the 2010-2011 National Championship runner-up team. Mary, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you. Mary, before we get into the abortion question, I have to know, did you play against any 7-foot transgender men back in 2010 for the Fighting Irish?
So hilarious that you asked. We actually did play against men, but they were on the practice squad to get us ready. But no, we did not play against any men. Thank goodness. Thank goodness.
It's a different time. I don't know. So presumptively you played against the men because they were better and they made you better to play against them. That's what most women's teams do, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And, right. we had a couple guys who could dunk every time down the court. And
right.
They had to have talks with the coaches about like, hey, that doesn't actually happen in women's basketball. So no more alley-oops.
Yeah. Nothing to make you feel like a man, like dunking on a college freshman girl as a guy, I guess. Well, it's kind of funny. It's like a tacit admission that there are differences between men and women in sports. But let's get on to the talk at hand. This is really interesting because we're in this new world when it comes to abortion since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so, I think a lot of people on the right feel like this issue's over. We won. That's what they feel. But the data is not showing that. Actually shows that abortions are up overall. I think there's a lot of questions about abortion pills and ways that are maybe even illegally these people are getting around new abortion laws. There's a lot going on in the state. So I'm really glad that we have you here. Can you just start by telling us the story of kind of what happened since Roe v. Wade up to now to kind of give the landscape for this issue that we're living in now?
Certainly. Well, I mean, that's a pretty long story, but I'll try to keep it concise. For the last 50 years, the left has been running this campaign of, an unborn child is a blob of cells that grows in your womb until actually after it's born, some of them believe. They have been saying, hey, women, you're not capable of doing virtually anything if you're a mom. And they've been saying, these children are not gifts from God. There's no plan. Mm-hmm. And if you want to take control of your life, your only option is to kill your unborn child. And they've done, unfortunately, a really good job of selling that lie. We've heard countless stories of professional singers, of actresses, of athletes who have all said either that they were pressured into having an abortion and they regret it, or who have said, I could not have done this without having had an abortion. And both of those are tragic and sad. But we had 50 years under this regime where the left had the total ability to say this is entirely legal. It's legal everywhere in America. You can kill an unborn baby up until the moment of birth, and in some states, there were no penalties for not administering assistance to a baby even after it was born alive after an abortion. And then Roe v. Wade was overturned with the beautiful Dobbs decision that said now legislators have the ability to protect unborn children. Well, and around the country, pro-life states did that. We saw in Texas, their abortion numbers dropped significantly. Places like Louisiana, their abortion numbers have gone way down. But we also saw the campaign from these rabid pro-killing unborn children states like California and New York, where they said, hey, we will pay for women to be able to travel here to kill their unborn baby. We'll do whatever's possible. We will use taxpayer dollars to fund the killing of unborn children here. And so over the course of the last 2 years, of the last several years since the Dobbs decision, we've actually seen, very sadly, an increase in the number of abortions that have been taking place. As you alluded to in the opening, that is largely because of the use of the abortion drug mifepristone, which is an incredibly dangerous drug that the Biden administration made available through the mail at a pharmacy, not over the counter yet, thankfully, but at a pharmacy. And they have done virtually everything possible to remove any protections for women taking that drug. It shouldn't surprise anyone that there's no protections for unborn children there, but even for women. So now we're living in this sort of wild west of abortion, where women are taking mifepristone either willingly or unwillingly, either knowingly or unknowingly. And we're seeing the fallout from this, the tragedy of women viewing their dead unborn baby in the toilet and wondering, is this bleeding and pain that I'm experiencing normal? And this is happening all across the United States, and I'm sure we'll get into that more later. But Planned Parenthood, of course, is one of the major pushers of this.
Right. And you mentioned the pain and the bleeding. These drugs are not maybe as safe as women are led to believe, right? I mean, how safe are these drugs for the women? Obviously, they're very fatal for the child, but how worried if you had a friend who confessed to you she just took this and she was having a lot of pain and bleeding, I mean, should you take her to the ER? I mean, what are the risks we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes, take her to the ER immediately. The complications from mifepristone become worse the further along in a woman's pregnancy that she was. But these drugs are not safe for anyone to be taking. The newest study on this shows that within 45 days of taking the drug, a woman has 11% of women who take it have serious adverse events as the result of it. Serious adverse events like an ER visit, like hemorrhaging, like sepsis, like the need for an operation to remove remaining fetal tissue. This is not Tylenol. It's a dangerous drug. And thanks to the Biden administration, it's available to be sent through the mail to someone.
Right. And there is a kind of a big battle over this with the FDA during the Biden administration, right? And there are people raising some of these concerns about safety and other things, or why this drug. I mean, I think it also kind of creates a constitutional crisis if it's illegal in a certain state to have an abortion, but then you are mailing this drug into that state where it's illegal. I mean, why is that not a federal crime? Maybe you can speak to that. But what happened? Why did the Biden administration, it seems like they really went to the mat to make sure this happen? Is that just all the energy and anger or that came in the aftermath of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, didn't, I know you're going to answer now, but did not make abortion illegal, as many lied and threatened that the Supreme Court would do. It just returned the issue to the states, as you know.
Right. So the Biden administration really took the overturn of Roe v. Wade as their cue to do everything possible to ensure that American women were aborting their unborn children. And that
they succeeded.
Oh,
they succeeded.
And they have in a lot of ways. They've, we have a fertility crisis in this country right now. Our birth rate is extremely low. And one thing no one is talking about is the number of babies who are already conceived, who we're killing every year. And this is tragic. Not only because it's contributing to this declining birth rate, but also because every one of those children has immense potential, is a unique gift from God, and there's a beautiful plan for that baby's life. As you mentioned, the Biden administration took several steps to make sure that mifepristone became even more popular than it was. One of the first things that they did was to remove the in-person dispensing safety requirement for mifepristone because it's such a dangerous drug. The pro-abortion Clinton administration made it subject to the REMS. These are safety requirements around the drug. And one of these was that it had to be dispensed in person by a physician who could assess for something like ectopic pregnancy or treat it. Now, I do want to point out that REM has actually never been the safeguard that they pretended it was. A physician who can assess for ectopic pregnancy doesn't necessarily mean that he will, because to actually assess for ectopic pregnancy would require doing an ultrasound on a woman. And we can bet that the abortionists aren't doing that.
Sure.
So the Biden administration removed that safety requirement, and then the Biden DOJ issued an opinion that said that this long-standing federal law, the Comstock Act, that says you cannot mail anything that will induce an abortion. You can't send it through the mail. The Biden DOJ issued this opinion that what they really meant by that was that you can't send anything through the mail that will induce an abortion if you know with certainty that it will be used for an abortion. And they said, since, the mailers of these drugs can't know with certainty that it'll be used for an abortion, well, then they can send it through the mail. This, of course, is ridiculous.
Sounds pretty disingenuous.
Yeah, absolutely ridiculous. And it's resulted in tragedies. We're throughout the Trump campaign, we heard the stories that were written up in Politico about the women who received these drugs either through the mail or in a pro-abortion state, but there was no one there to help them when they experienced severe complications. We've seen two cases from Louisiana, or a case from Louisiana and a case from Texas, where these drugs were mailed by an abortionist from New York, who clearly has no care in the world for what happens to women. In both cases, the women ended up in the ER, one with hemorrhaging, one was a teenage girl who was forced into taking this drug by her mom. The girl had a gender reveal party planned for her unborn baby, and she was coerced into this. And just yesterday, we saw two more accounts of men who have actually ordered this drug offline for the purpose of killing their girlfriend or partner unborn child and using it in that way. So the Biden administration really opened the door for women to be completely abused through the use of mifepristone.
Yeah, it's a lethal dose. Of course, many on the left will say, well, the baby's not yet alive, so it's not lethal. But if you gave this dose to someone, a pregnant woman, against her will, it's murder. You'd be charged with homicide for that. And so this drug we're talking about it's like you said, it's not Tylenol, it's not a vitamin, it's a lethal, and it's very effective at that. And so if you give it to 100 women, 11 of them need to go to the ER. And so because of that, there were, medical rules in place that said, hey, you need to be in the doctor's office after you take this. I mean, I remember after the COVID vaccine, some people were collapsing, and so you kind of had to be there. You had to stick around for a few minutes to make sure that you didn't like collapse or something. And I pretended to collapse at mine actually. And my nurse did not think it was funny at all, but I thought I'm an audience of one sometimes. And, but there's a lot safer drugs that we take a lot more precautions with. And for something that's causing, 11%, I don't know exact stats on other drugs, but that's a very high. I'm talking about like adverse effects of 11% is very high.
Absolutely.
Especially when, when it has to do with bleeding in particular. We're not talking about just like stomach pain or migraine. Whenever you take a drug and it causes you to bleed, that's a problem. That is a existential threat to your life, basically. So is it just purely politically motivated? Who cares about the consequences? We've got to get this pill out to everyone is the only way to basically undercut the Roe v. Wade ruling, because there's all these states where if we don't get this drug mailed to them, then women are just never going to get the abortions. Is that the basically political motive? And if some women die along the way, well, it's just the cost of doing business for the left.
I think it is of course, the Dobbs ruling allowed for states to enact pro-life laws. They allowed for every lawmaker to push for pro-life laws. But what we've seen is that under the Biden administration, the government was weaponized against Biden's political opponents, whether those be pro-lifers who were thrown in jail after recovering the fully formed bodies of babies who may have been victims of partial birth abortion from a clinic that was just blocks from the White House, or whether that political opponent was President Trump. The Biden administration weaponized the government against political opponents. And what we're seeing now is we're seeing state governments weaponizing the government against pro-life states. So the governor of New York has said, the governor of Louisiana signed an extradition order for this abortionist, Maggie Carpenter from New York, who has been mailing consistently abortion drugs into Louisiana that have resulted in women ending up in the emergency room. And the governor of New York said not only would she not act upon that extradition order, but she said something to the effect of, if they want to fight against abortion rights, I'm going to fight just as hard for these abortionists. And she said she would not do anything to follow through on that extradition order, and that abortionists are safe in her state regardless of what they do. So we really do have a major issue here that at some point will have to be resolved federally.
Yeah, try shipping a gun illegally across state lines and see how quickly you get prosecuted. By the way, guns are less lethal than these drugs. Than this drug we're talking about. Guns kill far fewer people than this pill in question, which is kind of incredible. Mary, do you hate women? You are opposing abortion. You must hate women. You must lay in bed at night thinking of how much you hate women, right?
Gosh, that is what people would have you believe. And there's this lie that's constantly spread about pro-lifers that we only want women in the home, that we don't want women progressing in society at all, that we're trying to hold them back. I've had 2 beautiful children here and a couple more in heaven. And, I can't tell you how much more beautiful my life is because of them. Mm-hmm. And how like any accomplishment I ever had, not that I've had many great ones, but any accomplishment I ever achieved pales in comparison to just hearing each of them say good morning. And that is such a gift. And I really think if women could understand the love that they will feel the second that that child is born, we would completely solve the issue of abortion, because no one would want to do it.
Well, it's so true. That's the big lie you mentioned earlier, is that, if you get pregnant, your life's over. And, I think that kind of had a certain appeal to me, or I kind of understood that when I was younger, before I had kids. But then once you have kids, you realize it's actually the complete opposite of the truth. Your life in a real way really begins when you have kids. And you can't always tell this to if someone doesn't have kids, it's not that they don't have a life or something, but you realize that probably the greatest thing that ever happened to you, aside from, your faith and your salvation, is having these kids. And you love them in a way that you didn't know you were capable of loving anyone, and you happily make sacrifices for them, and you feel nothing is more fulfilling. A job that was previously not fulfilling is now fulfilling because you are doing it for someone you love, and you love them more than you love yourself. And so it's amazing to me now that I've recently had children, that this is one of the biggest lies in all of society. And you mentioned the birth rate. Our birth rate, I think, has dropped to 1.6 children per woman. And I understand that, having kids is difficult, is very difficult in a way I don't understand, actually. And it's expensive, but we have to shout from the mountaintops that, as difficult or as expensive as it may be at times, that having a kid is basically the best thing you can ever do, and raising him up, in the ways of the Lord and all that. There's nothing more fulfilling, nothing giving you more joy or more life or gratification in your entire life, really.
Completely agree. And it's that mystery of how, in completely losing yourself, you find the greatest joy. And kids stretch you in every way possible, and thankfully there's no time to be selfish when you have little kids running around. And for me, at least, I found I like myself a whole heck of a lot better now that I have kids. Just because they have made me a much better person, and they've brought me closer to God. They've taught me so much about him, and about how he must feel in his relationship with me. Each time my kid tries to touch the stove, I think, oh Lord, that is probably how you feel with me every time that I'm about to sin.
Right. I'm remembering my younger self too, and I'm thinking, where'd this lie come from? And what people don't understand, who don't have kids, is that other people's kids are annoying often. But when your kids do the same thing, it's just different. I mean, of course, little kids can be, out of control sometimes, but you don't realize that when your kids do something that annoys everyone else, you're not going to feel the same way. Like when it's your kid crying on the plane, you're not annoyed, you're sad for them. Like, what's wrong with them? And everyone else may be annoyed. And so I think that's another thing people don't know. And part of me feels like, why, you might ask, what does this have to do with the abortion debate? But I think it goes to the core lie, which you hit on, which is that children are not a blessing, which is repeated all through the scripture, that children are a blessing. And I think that is one of the core lies, that children are a burden. That's the lie, that children are an inconvenience, that they're going to hurt your career, which is also a lie, because plenty of women who have kids have amazing careers. A lot of research suggests that men have better careers when they're, they have kids to take care of. They're more motivated and all that. And, it may slow you down for a few years, but the wisdom and maturity you get, and I've seen, my wife grow, it's just a big lie. And of course there's a policy, and we're going to get back into the policy, but I think we have to hit that. We kind of went a spiritual direction too. We were discussing at Family Research Council this morning, Micah chapter 3, and this really struck me, and I thought it was providential that I discussed it today. It says in chapter 3, verse 8, "But as for me, I am filled with power, with the Spirit of the Lord, and with justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression, and to Israel his sin." And what stood out to me about this, when we talk about abortion, there's the oft quoted, "I formed you in your mother's womb," which is very true, and it's a bedrock verse for this debate, that life does begin at conception. Scripture is clear on that, and that God actually has a plan for you before you're even conceived. And so every life is precious, no matter, so I think it's, to quote Dr. Seuss, no matter how small. But it says here, when you're filled with the Spirit, you're also filled with justice. You have a desire for justice. There's a lot of debate about in the church what it means to be filled with the Spirit. But one thing that I don't hear talked about is you're filled with the desire for justice and courage. And what does that look like? It might mean to declare to the nation of Israel, or in our case, the U.S., the sin that's going on all around us. And nobody wants to talk about sin, but I think that, and that's why people avoid this issue. So Mary, how did you get to this point of courage where you said, I'm going to be a person who speaks out on this? Because I think people listening, they may agree with you, but they're not going to be one who's going to take a stand, as we say at FRC, to stand, pray, vote, stand. They're not going to take a stand on this. They're just going to keep it private. Where did you get the courage and the conviction to say, I'm going to be that person who stands up for life and who stands up for justice by the Spirit?
I think, I have my parents to thank for that. Both of my parents have been very involved in the pro-life movement for my entire life. My mom ran a pregnancy resource center. My dad ran Citizens Concerned for Human Life, Blair County. And so, from a very young age, we were either putting leaflets on people's cars, telling them who the pro-life candidates were, or praying outside an abortion clinic, or sitting as my mom talked to a young couple who had an unexpected pregnancy, or doing, really anything else that my parents could think of to assist the pro-life movement. And so it was something that was ingrained in us, and something that just was always part of our family's identity. And so there was really no running from it. And I laugh now because, most people, when you meet them, you ask, well, what do you do for a living? And I always say that the second someone asks what I do for a living, they know just about everything about my views on anything. Whereas, if you ask someone and they say, oh, I'm an accountant, it's like, oh, okay, well, there's a lot more to get to know about you.
Right.
But that's really a gift that God has given me, because it's forced me to own that, even to people who I meet who I don't know what their views are on life. And it's been remarkable how God has used that. Just last weekend, I was with my kids up on a beach in Maryland, and some other kids came over to play with ours, and a mom came by, and we started talking, and she asked what I did, and I said, I do pro-life policy for Family Research Council. And she started to cry and told me the beautiful story of her little girl who she had given birth to 3 months ago, who had a trisomy and who lived for 6 beautiful hours. And I felt so honored to learn about that little saint who's now in the cloud of witnesses, who's here helping us today. But that's really been a gift that God has given to me to have my job be so tied into everything I believe.
Right. It's like when you sit next to a pastor on the airplane, you might get it, you're going to get the gospel shared with you. That's their end. Right. Wow. Well, that's really powerful. I love your courage. And I think it's, important for people to see that you can just take a stand on this issue and be a normal, nice, cool person, easy to talk to. And you don't have to be standing on a corner holding a sign. I understand there's different roles in this battle, but you can just talk and use your voice in conversation. And that makes a big difference. And one of the first things you can say is, hey, like we said, actually children are a blessing. I don't know what you've been lied to, and I know the media, whatever, children are a blessing, and they're the most fun and they're hilarious. And it's crazy seeing someone who looks like you, who has some of your bad habits, and then you have to raise them and help them not make the same mistakes as you. And, they do one little thing and you're so proud of them, and it's the best ever. I do want to talk about Planned Parenthood with you, because this is kind of a group that's sort of a boogeyman, but I think a lot of people don't understand it, or they've been hearing about it so long. And for all the attacks from the right, nothing's really changed. It seems like they're still doing what they do. And at some point, maybe you have to move on. Some of the stats we referenced at the top: Planned Parenthood broke 400,000 abortions in 1 year. That's a milestone. They are getting a ton of federal funding. And I saw you did some research on this, and this comes from their report. But Planned Parenthood, not only are they doing more abortions than ever, they're actually doing fewer other services. So whenever you criticize Planned Parenthood, the first thing you hear is, oh, where they're helping women, they're doing cancer screenings, they're doing this and that. They, I don't know, have a mariachi band on Casual Friday, whatever it is, right? They are doing all kinds of things. And abortion is just something, it's like an office down the hall. It's not even their main focus. But in this report, we see abortions are up 400,000, which is an incredible, horrific number. But their total services are down more than 10%. So I have some stats here. Prenatal services are down 63%. Contraceptive services down 38%. And the cancer screening services are down 54%. I mean, that's a lot. If you had any other business where one of your main services, which they allege it is, went down 54%, it'd be a crisis in leadership. You have CEOs fired, whatever it may be. 61% decrease in breast exams, and Pap tests are down 54%. So in every metric besides abortion, it seems Planned Parenthood is cratering, and they are more and more becoming just an abortion provider in this veil that they do all these other things, and abortion is just a side issue. That's kind of falling away. Am I reading this right? I mean, or is this what people need to know?
That's absolutely right. And one of the things that people often associate Planned Parenthood with, like the neat abortions, right? They're not associated with the Kermit Gosnells, who had a separate room for Black women than he did for white women and kept bodies, or they're not associated like that, but they should be. And even the New York Times has run a report on this, that the conditions in the Planned Parenthoods that are doing these abortions are horrific. That they're not sanitary, that there's blood on the floor, that these are places that are whorehouses, in a house of horrors, in the sense that people go into it and they think that they're just getting rid of a clump of cells. They've bought this lie that their life is going to be better. They maybe think that they made a mistake and this is going to erase it. And then they go in and they're treated terribly, and no one cares about their opinion. There's countless stories of women who partway through talked about, well, gosh, I don't know if I want to do this or not. And they're not listened to. And then the conditions aren't even sanitary. And then their unborn baby is killed. And they leave feeling emptier than ever. So what we're seeing from Planned Parenthood is that abortion is their business, that the business is dirty and it's horrific, and that it is at the crux of what Planned Parenthood does. But they do one other thing, and that is they campaign for abortion to remain legal wherever possible.
Like politically, you mean?
Yeah. And that's one of the craziest things to me about the amount of federal funding that they receive. They received almost $800 million in not just federal funds, but in taxpayer dollars, so state and federal. And yet they're spending millions in the 2024 election cycle. They spent $40 million on Democratic candidates. Right. So it is basically the government funding Democrats when they're funding Planned Parenthood. And this is something that just needs to come to an end. Americans don't want their taxpayer dollars going for killing unborn children. They certainly don't want their taxpayer dollars going for killing unborn children in unsanitary conditions where women are treated with disrespect and hate. And it's something that needs to stop. So
is it true that Planned Parenthood is getting more money than ever, or it's at least comparable amount?
They are, and they get this money in a number of different ways. There are a number of states that have enacted laws so as to ensure that even if federal funding goes away, state funding will go to these abortion businesses.
And does any of the state money specifically fund the abortions? Because I know federal money usually can't directly pay for the abortion, allegedly, although the money's all fungible, and I get that that's kind of a scam. But does the state money have that same limitation?
Well, so it depends where you're at. Is the short answer there. But as you said, money is fungible. So if I give you $800 million, well, well, you can certainly find a use for it. And that frees up $800 million in your budget to do whatever else you want to with it.
Right. Right. Well, it's interesting that I just bring that up because the money is higher than ever, nearly $1 billion, and yet their non-abortion services have plummeted. So all their medical services have dropped, that I just read off. So many of them drop by 50%, sometimes more, but the funding's gone up. So if they're doing less medical care, how are they getting more medical money? And they're doing more abortions, but don't worry, the money's not going to abortions. It doesn't really add up.
Well, and the crazy thing is Planned Parenthood brick and mortar buildings are closing down all across the country. And they're saying that this is the result of Dobbs, and praise God if it is. But one of the things that we as pro-lifers need to be aware of is that each time one of these Planned Parenthoods closes, while we should celebrate, we should also recognize that they're just mailing mifepristone to women, that they're still doing these drug abortions, and that's their huge moneymaker. If they don't have to pay for a building and they can just ship the drugs through the mail, that costs so much less for them to do, and it also takes away the opportunity that so many pro-lifers have grasped of reaching out to those women as they are walking into a Planned Parenthood, of giving them another option to maybe visit a pregnancy resource center or look into, the other options that they have. So, we want to celebrate each Planned Parenthood that closes on one hand, but at the same time, we need to recognize the abortion numbers are still going up. And so we have a lot of work to do.
Okay, so there's something fishy going on here with the money. I know they get a lot of Medicaid reimbursements, but it's still just interesting that they themselves report that a lot of their medical services have plunged, and yet they're still getting all this money, which they promise not to use for abortions, which is, pretty suspect. I'm picturing some woman in like Alabama somewhere who takes a mifepristone, who's pregnant, and then she starts to have health complications. And she's afraid to go to the ER. Maybe because she doesn't want to be exposed for having had an illegal abortion. And so it's not as if like just mailing these drugs to people solves the problem. You're actually going to put this woman in a weird spot where she's done something, illegal. But now she has to go to the hospital for it. It's like, if she goes to the hospital, what happens to these women so for instance, 400,000 abortions, I know many of them were in person, but if they were all mifepristone, that'd be 41,000 women who needed to, the 11%, 41,000-ish who need to go to the 44,000 who need to go to the ER because they're having a health issue. Can they go? Are they getting in trouble? Is, Trump himself personally like locking up women who go to the ER for medical care and, stashing them with the kids in cages that Obama created or something?
Well, the left would love for you to believe that. I can't count the number of times that I heard during the election season that women will be bleeding out in their cars because they'll no longer be able to receive care. And they were talking about women having miscarriages there. But this is it's just a lie that pro-abortionists are trying to push. There's not a single state in this country where a woman is going to be prosecuted for having an abortion. Now, there are states in this country where the state government may go after the abortionist who mailed her that drug, or if there was, a man who drugged the woman's drink, as we've seen happen multiple times. Yeah, there are places where he will be prosecuted, but there's not a single place where a woman is going to be refused care from an emergency room or where she is going to be held accountable by the government for having that abortion. And so the left keeps trying to push this lie that pro-life laws put women's lives in danger because, according to them, obviously women have to have abortions. There is no other option. But then if they do that, they're going to be thrown into jail. That's just it's not true. It's not happening.
Yeah. And it's something like for every, all these women who walk into a Planned Parenthood, I think the latest data said, I may be off one or two on my numbers here, but, it takes 136 abortions for every one adoption referral. And so we're not even talking about women who actually go through the process and get the adoption and it's success, give up the baby and all that. We're just talking, if you're an unborn baby and your mom walks into Planned Parenthood, it's 136 to 1 they're going to be aborted. And, the 1% chance, less than 1% chance that you're going to be given up for adoption, which is kind of an amazing number because I think generally data shows that a higher percentage of women would be open to adoption if they were guided in that direction. It's much less than a fraction of 1%. And yet Planned Parenthood, but just based on those numbers, there's no way that they're actually presenting that as a good option or having that conversation or presenting it as 50-50. Do you want to go the adoption route or the abortion route? Because, you have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than going to Planned Parenthood and walking out with adoption documents, it seems like. Is that part of what is that? I don't understand what, Planned Parenthood gets out of going through with the abortion versus at least trying to provide other options for women.
Well, they get money, right?
There's that.
If a woman decides to place her child for adoption and makes that courageous decision, well, Planned Parenthood just lost out on whatever the cost of killing her child was.
Right.
But when they talk about adoption referrals, they're talking a lot of times about sliding a pamphlet across the desk, the woman,
right,
that says something somewhere in there about adoption. They're not talking about like actual conversations about what that would look like or whether or not she would want it. That's not something that I think is happening at any Planned Parenthood.
Right. Okay. So we've hit on I think we've exposed some of the big lies here. There's the lie that children are not a blessing when they clearly are. And people who have kids will tell you, I don't care what, sitcom you grew up where the mom was miserable and the dad was a doofus. Generally, if you talk to real people, they die for their kids without hesitation and they love them. Another lie is that, in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade, women are going to be prosecuted and locked up, which is kind of hilarious because we can't even deport illegal immigrants or prosecute homicides in Baltimore or something. So the idea that we're going to be locking up women for abortions was always a farce. So that was a big lie that, Trump hates women and Republicans hate women and they're just waiting to drop the hammer on them and throw them in the back of police cars. It's been a total lie. And then, the other lie is that it's going to be impossible to get an abortion. That was the other lie leading up to Roe v. Wade, is that there was going to be some poor 14-year-old girl who was just going to have no abortion access. And it was a lie. There's more abortions now than there were before Roe v. Wade. So I think it's just important that we expose the lies on this issue. There's a lot of work to be done. I think that this abortion pill is very unsafe. And just from a medical standpoint, RFK Jr., whoever else can work on putting restrictions to protect those 11% of women who are putting their life at risk, for instance. That's a good place to start. But more than that, we just have to call out these lies for what they were, because what happens is we're having some big policy debate and there's all these lies that happen and they help win the argument. And then when the debate's over, we just kind of forget and the liars get away with it. And so as this goes on, when you hear these lies again or other arguments from certain people on the left on this issue, you have to remember, well, they lied to us about this and they've been lying. And what we have to call it the truth in exchange.
Absolutely. And Planned Parenthood is the chief liar. They specialize in it. They have so many things that they say that are either from their president or on their website that are just straight up lies. And anytime we can combat that, it's a win for life.
So as we kind of land the plane here, what does the future look like? We're having these state battles. In November, we had all these state referendums where there was a lot of abortion measures, and they generally did pretty well, actually, for, pro-abortion, from a pro-abortion perspective. A lot of them were successful. What does the future look like? Are we going to have another round of state referendums in the next election? Here's another big lie. Trump's going to sign a national abortion ban. That never happened, right? That's another big lie. Is there any chance of a national abortion ban? For people who are saying, okay, I agree with Mary, I want to stand up, but I want to be engaged in policy too, not just a voice. What's happening? What can be on the lookout for at the state and the federal level?
So I think at the federal level, the thing that we really need to be laser focused on is mifepristone. Alexis McGill Johnson talked about mifepristone being 70% of abortions. That's huge.
Wow.
It's a huge number. If if we could have the FDA do a real examination of mifepristone, I think we'd be in a very different spot, because that drug has never been tested the way that other drugs have. It was pushed through in an expedited move that was politically charged. It was never tested at all on its impact on girls under the age of 18. It was never tested at all on the conditions that it was being distributed with. And so if there was an actual fair assessment of the drug, I think we'd be in a very, very different place with how widely it's being distributed. My hope is that the approval of the drug would be repealed entirely. I don't know that we would get that, but I think that we would at least be at a place where there would be more restrictions placed on it. So at the federal level, anything that we can do to put pressure on the federal government to re-examine that, and anything that we can do to put some pressure on Congress to say, hey, you guys have the power too to be enacting some guidelines around mifepristone, and we need that, because we can't be killing unborn children as if it's the same as taking a Tylenol, and we can't be putting women's lives at risk. The two of those are unacceptable. At the state level, I think there's a lot of work to be done. We did see referendums, the pro-life side fail in a number of states, and I'm sure the pro-abortionists are going to be back with more referendums in the next election cycle. So that education starts at the home. Right? It starts with talking to your kids. It starts with talking to your neighbors. Those are the people that it's actually hardest to have the conversations with, because those are the people where there's something that you risk in having that tough conversation about the truth of the dignity of the human person. But those are the ones that actually make the difference. So at the state level, I think we need to be having those conversations now before those referendums are introduced. And I think we need to be telling state legislators, hey, it's time, we've got to keep moving on this. Overturning Roe was great, and it gave state and federal legislators the power to actually protect life. And now it's time for us to get on the ball here and do it. We have some states that have been great examples in this, states like Louisiana and Texas, and others have done a fantastic job. But for other states, they need to know the life issue isn't over. And we won't be finished with it until there is not a single unborn child who is aborted in the United States.
Well, Mary, a mother, a leader, a voice for life, and a great asset at Family Research Council. And what position did you play for the Fighting Irish, Mary?
So I was actually a 5. I'm only 5'10".
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, a center.
Yeah.
Man, okay, a center for the Fighting Irish, and it's really been a good conversation. Kind of a heavy topic, but in the spirit of Micah 3, there's a certain point where it means a lot of things to be filled with the Spirit, but one of the things it means is that you're filled with justice, and you have a desire for justice, and you have to say some things to the country that they might be uncomfortable with, but it's because you love the Lord and you love the unborn, and honestly, you love women. And as we can see, it's not good for them. It's not safe for them. And I really appreciate the insight and sort of the analysis and experts you brought to the conversation, Mary.
Well, thanks so much for having me on. And I should add, my real position was left bench. So,
I played off to the side.
Yeah.
That was my position. So, thanks so much for coming on, and thanks for listening to Outstanding. You can check out the Washington Stand online, and check in next week. Be sure to subscribe. I'm your host, Casey Harper. Mary, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Outstanding is a production of The Washington Stand, your source for news and commentary from a biblical worldview. Our technical producers are Yusef Fletcher and David Salkeld. Our guest coordinator and production assistant is Rachel Woods. Our executive producer is Jared Bridges. Help support this podcast by texting the word OUTSTANDING to 67742 and read more at washingtonstand.com.